Before us stands the might of the Darkspawn Horde. Gaze upon them now, but fear them not. The man you see beside me is an elf, raised to the ranks of the Grey Wardens. And never a more glorious Grey Warden has there been. He has survived despite the odds, and without him, none of us would be here. Today, we saved Denerim. Today, we avenge the death of my brother King Kaelan. But most of all, today, we show the Grey Wardens that we remember and honor their sacrifice. For Ferelden! For the Grey Wardens!
I love that scene. Like the ride of the Rohirrim in Return of the King, my favourite moment in any film, period. It gets me choked up every time. 15 years, and this game still holds up just as well as the first playthrough. There comes a time in any creative industry where the stars align and it produces work that cannot be replicated. For cinema, in my opinion, this was the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The perfect balance of talent, artistry, and the budget behind it. Any sooner, the effects would have painfully dated it because of computers at the time. Any later, and, well, just look at Rings of Power. The time immediately following the acquisition of Pandemic and BioWare was that moment. I've gone on and on about what EA did and the commercialized crap that RPGs have turned into before, but it's important to acknowledge that BioWare, just like Looking Glass Studios or Troika, would have otherwise gone under. As much as we'd like it to, quality doesn't necessarily result in strong sales. This short time frame brought huge financial power to the studio and allowed the team to bring what they'd envisioned to life before EA really got its hooks into the studio. What this resulted in was two of my favourite games ever, Mass Effect 2 and Dragon Age Origins. This game, these characters, this world, it means everything to me. Don't worry, I won't get all teary-eyed, but long story short, Origins was a refuge, an escape for me through tough times. Like an old friend, Dragon Age Origins is something I've kept coming back to again and again over the years, and this video is an attempt to finally put that into words. I could do no less than what this timeless classic of a game deserves. This is my first attempt at trying a long-form retrospective style thing, so a couple of things before we get into it. First of all, I won't be going through beat by beat and describing what happens, because either you've already played it to death like I have, or you don't care about that kind of detail anyway. Just summarizing things, as is so often the case in these kind of videos, is a lazy way to pad the runtime. Secondly, this is not intended to be some highbrow critique or a comprehensive analysis of every little thing. I'll touch on topics like combat or particular mechanics if I feel like it's necessary, but this video is a love letter to a game I've put over 1,000 hours into over the years, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Dragon Age Origins is so important to me, and I'm well aware that's nostalgia, but you better believe I'm still going to talk about it at length, goddammit. There will be timestamps for each chapter as we go. I have no idea how long this will be until I've recorded and edited everything together. I currently have about 30 hours and 350 gigabytes worth of footage to sift through, but feel free to jump around as we go in mostly chronological order. Don't ask about what mods I'm using either, because I have no idea. My overwrite folder is a messy collection I've steadily added to over the years, and at this stage I have no idea what's in it. DA2Ls for sure, so they're not just beady-eyed humans with pointy ears. Vignette remover, because I hate that shit in any game. And a bunch of patches, armors, textures, that kind of thing. Finally, apologies in advance for the choppy frame rate at times. I use the LAA patch, which is practically required. Origins is not in a good state on modern PCs, and I strongly recommend anyone who plays this masterpiece uses that too. It helps with the memory leak and performance, but remember that it's a compromise, not a fix. I'll leave a link to it in the description. So, with all that being said, now we should start where all good things do, at the beginning. The first obstacle faced by anyone doing world building, for RPGs or otherwise, is how to convey that organically. You could have the best lore in the world, a timeline, a creation myth, Thousands of years of intricate, believable history that's just waiting to be explored, but people aren't coming into your story for a Wikipedia page. It needs to be woven in throughout, and exposition used with tact. Faced with the challenge of bringing players into an entirely new universe, BioWare created the Origins system for player backstories and achieved something that no other game has before or since. For this playthrough, I went with a city elf rogue named Altheus. He's lawful neutral, with a personal code about putting others before himself, but has a particular streak about humans that are violent towards elves. The beauty of the Origin system is that it doesn't just stop there. It not only allows you to define your character's backstory within the world before things really kick off, but it will frequently call back to it as well. I've done so many playthroughs over the years with every origin, every class, every combination, and the replay value here is unparalleled. It deepens the world building to look at events from a different angle, and will often recontextualize characters that a more traditional or by-the-book hero role would otherwise ignore. Is your warden a mage in the Circle Tower, living right under the thumb of factional infighting and the ever-vigilant Templars that would cut people down without a second thought? Are you a Dalish elf, left to wander the wilds in an endless quest to find the scraps of a once great people that was destroyed? Are you the youngest child of the great House Ijukan, caught in a struggle between your brothers, or the noble scion of the famed Kuzlin line, trying to do your father proud? What makes this all the more incredible is that every origin still occurs regardless of what you choose. What the Origin system achieved was creating an intricate, believable web that ripples out and, in turn, affects the rest of the world. I've talked before about what a joke the life path in Cyberpunk 2077 turned out to be, and that most RPGs will throw the player a bone every now and then to talk about their past, but it's essentially flavor text. Not so in Dragon Age Origins. Compare this with the choice around who will become the next king in Orzammar. A human noble or mage, for example, without any prior knowledge, will be there to secure troops first and foremost, and probably just go with whoever they think is best. Play a Dwarven Commoner, however, and the stakes drastically shift. Your sister Rika is Balin's mistress, and has the opportunity to make a new life for herself and escape poverty. But then we also have the Dwarven Noble, which drastically changes things once again. Balin is a snake, organized your brother's murders, quite possibly your father as well, and led to your exile. But what is best for Orzammar? What is best for the Wardens or for Eldon? Choices within choices within choices. That level of interconnected storytelling is insane, and something that no other game has accomplished. Your Dwarven Commoner still lived, Rika still lived, just not on this playthrough, and they died a slow death in a cell. Jowen's friend is still back at the Circle, likely with Lily too. The human noble was killed along with the rest of their family in Al Hal's betrayal. You may have met Duncan, but not every origin did, and not everyone gets the chance to change their fate. You've probably heard of the butterfly effect. It's something that a lot of choice-based games will attempt. Look at Telltale for how meaningless and on rails these choices often are, but Dragon Age Origins achieves this in a way that I haven't seen any other RPG do. The world building is second to none, a tapestry that keeps revealing more and more the deeper you look, and it's truly remarkable. Sure, a lot of Thedas is fairly derivative, relying on established fantasy tropes of elves, knights, dragons, and so forth, and not every dark, edgy fantasy subversion sticks the landing here, but Origins has stood the test of time for more than 15 years. It is something that teams with 10 times the budget and people haven't been able to replicate, and the value it adds is incredible. It's not enough to simply be in a world. The best RPGs allow you to both live in and affect it. Even a certain game about being a mailman in the desert can't compare to what a triumph Dragon Age Origins is. But now Ostagar calls, and something wicked this way comes. There's a certain elegance in how the Grey Wardens are positioned in the world. It's something the short experiment of Soldier's Peak would explore a little bit more, mostly forgettable like a lot of DLC for this game, but a politically neutral faction that exists to defend against the Darkspawn brings with it a lot of freedom and narrative agency. Because Ferelden faces the Fifth Blight, and you have any number of reasons to not want that to pass, the player is able to justify siding with factions and whatever it takes to stop the Archdemon. Introducing players to the Wardens through Duncan was an excellent way to get us invested in the central plot, as well as sympathizing with the faction we're thrown into. Any RPG can do the big bad, world-ending stakes, but watching your mentor figure die, the kind-hearted man who rescued your character from death, or worse, is further motivation for the plot. The Darkspawn are ultimately a force of nature, but Loghain and his lackeys give a face and name to the threat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Ostagar is able to accomplish a hell of a lot for what is, comparatively, a very small part of a giant, sprawling epic of a game. The introduction of Morrigan and Flemeth, the treaties, and forcing the player to sit down and pay attention to how dangerous the Darkspawn really are. If most of the country's forces were decimated in one battle, hell, even without Loghain's betrayal, what chance do you have? It's here we also get our first proper look at the Wardens behind the scenes. It was basically a running gag at this point for BioWare to kill off the supporting characters like Davith and Sir Jory, similar to Jenkins in Mass Effect, or the humble King Trask as he fought to take down Darth Mustache, without the buff, for want of a better word, that immunity to the taint provides, not to mention the importance of a Warden slaying the Archdemon, which we'll get to much later on. It's easy to forget that even touching their blood is corrupting, but the Warden's job is thankless, and they hold the line, whatever the cost. For all the New Vegas fans watching, I'm sure you hear him as Easy Pete, but long before that, I knew Peter Renaday as Duncan. In their prime, BioWare and Obsidian to some extent had this amazing knack for finding mostly unknown talent who would deliver the performance of a lifetime. Obviously, there was Sarah Kesterman as Kreia, but they launched Jennifer Hale's career, Mark Meir, of course, Steve Valentine as Alistair, Corinne Kemper as Liliana, Mark Hildreth as my man Sten, and even more popular actors like Kate Mulgrew, John Curry, or Claudia Black were now loved by people who hadn't seen their other work. Shale, who is so often forgotten among the rest of the cast, was voiced by Geraldine Blecker, an actress from the UK whose previous credit had been in 1987. The cast that BioWare was able to assemble was rivaled only by Mass Effect in sheer talent, but we'll get to the characters more later. For now, I would like to pay respect to Blecker, who died in 2021, and Peter Renaday, who died last year at age 89. Maybe these roles were ultimately just paychecks to them, but they meant a lot to a lot of people. Anyway, I'm not going to dig into Morrigan or Alistair just yet, we'll save that for the companion section later on. But suffice to say, the dynamic between these two is set from pretty much the get-go.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
With the stage set and the hopes of not just Kaelin, but the entire nation riding on this battle, it should be a piece of cake, right? Well, no. That isn't this kind of story. As we've touched on a bit already, the Warden's getting annihilated. The King's death and establishing Loghain as the central antagonist from then on was masterfully done. I particularly like this exchange with Loghain just before the battle.
I don't suppose you'll be riding into the thick of battle with the rest of your fellows, will you? Here for the glory, huh? Fair enough. Now I must return to my task. Pray that our king proves amenable to wisdom, if you're the praying sort. Then simply pray.
Ostagar does a great job tearing down the illusions of a fairy tale ending without ever straying into edgy, grimdark stuff for the sake of it, at least in my opinion. Left to pick up the pieces, only you and Alistair now remain against the growing forces of corruption. It seems impossible, but there are others you can call on. To defeat the Archdemon, you won't be able to do it alone. When I've talked about Baldur's Gate 2 over 3, or Fallout over Fallout 4, or Origins over Inquisition, a lot of it comes back to a core focus. In the age of open worlds and chasing this misconception that the total playtime or hour count is more important than the substance of what you're actually doing through all that time, many games, not just RPGs, have forgotten what it means to rein in scope and go for depth rather than breadth. Part of the magic of BioWare games was the hub worlds that each area presented. Manaan or Korriban in KOTOR, Spellhold, the Underdark or Trademeet in Baldur's Gate 2, or Omega, Ilium or the Citadel in Mass Effect. There wasn't unnecessary padding or a concern to fill the space between these places. Instead of the lifeless, barren stretches of Inquisition, all the effort was put into the stories, the characters, and the ties to the central plot in each of these self-contained areas. Of course, inking in the treaties the player collected at Ostagar was a nice touch to then justify pursuing them. Through this, the world expands even further as if the Origin system hadn't done enough, and once again ties back into the choices you've previously made. Old characters return, and your life before the Wardens continues to ripple outward, whether you like it or not. Get out and see the world not because you're on a treadmill, but because there is every reason to. There's stories to tell, characters to meet, and what a world it is. I won't lie, Dragon Age Origins is not a pretty game, even for its time. It fell into the same trap of equating dark fantasy with making everything literally dark and various shades of brown. Morrowind, KOTOR, even Baldur's Gate on the Infinity engine from 10 years before have aged better. At the same time though, the amount of locations and what the art team was able to accomplish is yet another example of what good art direction means that'll hold up more than purely chasing fidelity. People remember Bloodborne, Assassin's Creed 2, Red Dead Redemption, or Bioshock far more than they do the latest Ubislop or the pause on Aloy's face. Dragon Age Origins does have its moments of beauty, you just need to look for it. It's worth noting that from here, you're free to tackle the game in essentially whatever order you like. You can skip vast swaths of content, recruit or dismiss whoever you like, and because there is no oversight from the rest of the Grey Wardens, given that, they're all the way back in the Anderfells and this little thing might have happened at Ostagar, your role as both the player and the character in world is free to go where you see fit. The introduction rounds out with the visit to Lothering and a reminder of the very real cost of the Blight as refugees begin to pile up. It's here we're introduced to Liliana and Sten as well.
This is a proud and powerful creature, trapped as prey for the Darkspawn. If you cannot see a use for him, I suggest releasing him for mercy's sake alone.
Mercy? I wouldn't have expected that from you.
I would also suggest that Alistair take his place in the cage.
Yes, that's what I would have expected.
I appreciate the attempt to tutorialize some of the less important skills like poison and trap making, but if you've reached this point and for some reason haven't played Origins yourself, don't bother with them. Making a poultice here and there or a crunch for best boy dog is nice, but the only skills you should really focus on are persuasion, combat training, and tactics if you care enough about that. The rest are kind of useless, and in the many years I've spent playing this game, most of them I've never used once. Since we're talking about tactics and a few companions are on board now, I'll throw in a quick bit of advice here for people new to Origins. Make sure to go to the tactics screen as soon as you recruit someone. For whatever reason, they default to a custom setup which isn't ideal. The tactics system is incredible in how much it can be tailored and customized to automate what would otherwise require constant micromanagement. I can't think of any other game that even comes close to this kind of thing, but for all intents and purposes, you should just pick one of the default templates like Scrapper, Defender, Archer, Healer, etc., and it'll fill out automatically from there. From here, I'll be going through the order I always play and talking about each section as we go. First up, let's check in on Redcliffe. You'd think the team was just flexing at this point with yet another whole sequence of choices stacked upon choices in the defense sequence for Redcliffe. Just to impress upon you how much can change here, you can poke around and compel the lazy barkeep or an agent for Loghain into helping with the defenses. Characters will die in the fight and be mourned. You can find resources in the town to help with the defenses, or you can just stand back, ignore Redcliffe entirely, and let it be razed to the ground. If it wasn't already clear, Origins lives and dies by its choices, and you have the kind of freedom that no other game can come close in comparison. More than that, it will actively react and change depending on what you do. This is great stuff. By the time the player breaks into the castle, we come across Jowen, and for most players, the first real introduction to blood magic. Jowen is a great example of a well-written coward character. If you've played the Mage Origin, obviously you know how that whole mess went down, but in many ways, he's a slave to his fear and insecurity. Ironically, he ruins his life trying to help, but he also kicked off a chain of events that no one could have seen coming. As the first big introduction to alliances and the state of the world, it's clear that Loghain's reach extends to even here. More to the point, he had so little faith in Calin that what happened at Ostagar was seemingly planned well in advance. While Al-Eamon is a fine enough character, and I feel indifferent to Connor, he's more there as a plot device than his own person, I would like to give special mention to Louisa Paticus as Isolde, because wow, maybe that's controversial. I know a lot of people will find the whole "who is this woman, Tegan?" grazing, but her performance is on a whole other level if you decide to go a certain route. She begs to save Connor, even gladly offering herself up to save her boy and stop the demon, but if you don't, she gets down on her knees and pleads for her child in a take that's so emotionally raw and desperate, it's hard to believe this is in a game from the 2000s. Of course, this is also the game that had moments like this. But no one's perfect. Thankfully, we don't have to go that route unless we want to, so instead, I'll show you how to save everyone, no sacrifice required. For a long time, I didn't know this route was possible given it's buried behind one particular dialogue option, but if you're paying close attention to what Jowen says, to confront the demon that's possessed Connor in the Fade, it needs power from either blood or lyrium. Good thing then, that we just so happen to have another treaty with the Circle of Magi. The struggle between the fundamental opposites in the Mages and Templars is something the series would explore to varying success later on, Kirkwall being an obvious example with that annoying lunatic Anders, but the moral conundrum at the heart of it was best explored in Origins. It's in the Ferelden Circle and what happens with Aldred that shows why mages need to be controlled, that the needs of the many must outweigh the rights of the few, and that both the Templars and the Mages are not without guilt, nor responsibility. Barring one section we'll be getting to in a bit, this is also where Origins leans most into the horror of its setting. Sure, the data graphics means the effect doesn't hit quite as hard today, but the terror of abominations and the constant threat of what it is to dabble in the Fade is brought into grotesque detail here. Imagine doing something as simple as walking down the street, yet there's the knowledge that you or anyone around you could explode at any time and massacre everyone. The Mage-Templar conflict is not black and white, and that's part of what makes the many moral and ethical questions Origins poses so beautiful. For all the might of the Maker, however, we find the Templars are little use against the true terrors of the Fade. Of course, we need to get to the tower first.
Oh, you're a Grey Warden, are you? Prove it. Kill some Darkspawn. Come on, let's see some righteous Grey Wardening.
Parshera, here. Munch on these if you like.
Ho, cookies!
Since we're here, let's talk about dungeons and RPGs for a bit. Yet another side effect of the open world plague today. Dungeon crawling has become a one and done affair. Essentially, these spaces are mathematically calculated to have tiered loot at the end of it, and they act like a theme park ride, with only the slightest bump. To not challenge the intelligence of the lowest common denominator, much of game design is geared towards today. Bethesda played a huge part in this, obviously. Skyrim's dungeons feel less like action actual places and more circles that inevitably lead back to the door and a big old chest for you to pick up more crap you don't need. But then we have the circle in Origins. BioWare had a long pedigree of making some amazing dungeons and tying great stories to it too. Durlag's Tower from Baldur's Gate was the pinnacle of this. A big, ever-changing dungeon that actually presented obstacles and took serious effort to overcome. If we come back to the circle, the player not only needs to reach the top of the tower, but venture into the Fade and confront the realm of dreams and demons themselves. First of all though, we need some help. Even if I wasn't romancing her this playthrough and, the fact mages are basically essential in this game, I like to take Morrigan along for the little speech she gives here.
You want us to assist this preachy schoolmistress to rescue these pathetic excuses for mages? They allow themselves to be corralled like cattle, mindless. Now their masters have chosen death for them, and I say, let them have it.
It's one of her many standout moments, pushing back against the zealotry of the Templars and, at least in her mind, the meekness of these mages to allow themselves to be controlled. I might have put them to the sword at some point. I think it was the playthrough with a female human noble that went all in on chantry zealotry, but mages are ultimately too good to pass up. Plus, when spirit healing is a lifesaver, literally. Problem is, we need to make it to the top of the tower first. I don't want to keep dropping clips over and over, but there's an interaction you might miss as you're going up floor by floor. It does a wonderful job capturing the central conflict from the Circle Mage's perspective, as well as being another fine example of the fantastic writing in this game. To think how far BioWare has fallen from this.
The magic was a means to an end. It gave me the power to fight for what I believed.
Fighting for what you believe is commendable, but the ends do not always justify the means.
You don't really believe that, do you, Wynne? Change rarely comes peacefully. Andraste waged war on the Imperium. She didn't write them a strongly worded letter. She reshaped civilization, freed the slaves, and gave us the Chantry. But people died for it.
Is it better to die resisting than a life of, in their minds, servitude, submission? Aldred ultimately being revealed as a pride demon is very fitting, but Origins loves wading through this murky, grey area of morality, rather than the moral absolutes of the light and dark side. What is best or right? Perhaps, more importantly, who will be the most useful to the Wardens? Of course, we can't talk about the Circle section without everyone's worst nightmare, the Fade. Maybe this is a hot take, but I don't mind the Fade. It's disorienting the first few times for sure, and it'll feel like you have no idea where to go or what you're doing, but it's actually pretty straightforward. The shape-shifting is a neat little twist, and actually quite ambitious given the engine at the time, but think of it like following a pattern clockwise. You go as far as you can around the inner layer until you get a new form to use, then hit a roadblock, so move on to the next one. By the time you've made it around to the raw Fade again with Niall, you'll have everything you need and breeze through it with no issues. I'm all for people modding their games however they want. Big shocker, I know. But the idea of skipping an entire section of the game because it might be frustrating or not as fun is a bit much. The stat creases alone make it worthwhile. Sure, I'm talking from the experience of someone who's played Origins to death and knows all the ins and outs, but I can tell you from the first time I played it to today, you can get through the Fade the same way as any other dungeon. It's like an hour at most. The companion dreams are well worth a look if you haven't seen them all before. Again, there was a crazy amount of time and effort put into reacting to individual characters and specific conditions. I had Stan and Morrigan with me. Shale is another great one, so bear with me. I have to show these.
This is a dream. I'm not a fool, Warden. I remember seeing the Karashok there have his head torn off.
Well, at least it's not a great loss.
You are so entertaining, Kadan. You should perform in the square with the other trained monkeys.
I am your mother. Do you not love me?
You are as much my mother as my little finger right here is the Queen of Ferelden.
Surely such pride must be punished. That is for not showing respect.
That is far more like it, but it is too little too late, Spirit.
One of my favourite lines from Sten, representing how much he's grown already as a character, is when you confront the Sloth Demon. He says the following.
And it is time to finish this. I have had enough of cages.
My man. Jumping back a sec though, I love how the Warden's dream plays out with Duncan at Weishaupt. It's subtle and maybe not something that players will pick up on, but refusing to sit by and accept things as they are is an interesting point to raise as the player begins to slowly claw their way back to the waking world. I don't have much to say about Cullen. Obviously he became a huge fan favourite by Inquisition, but it's an interesting thing to contrast just before the player either goes up to save or slaughter the mages that here's a man who has suffered the very real effects of power gone awry. One of the great ironies of Dragon Age is that the Chantry uses Templar's addiction to lyrium as its own leash. As we round things out here at the tower, I appreciate the fact that the Litany of Adrala is something to actively use in combat, and that, in of itself, is also a choice. No doubt many players have become distracted in combat and then forgot to help Irving and the rest, leaving them all dead. It could have been just as easy for Wynne to get the Litany, or essentially imply its use off screen, but no. If you want to save the mages, or resist domination yourself, make sure to use it. Origins leaves the Circle's fate open. The player did not save it, per se, but there is some semblance of order again, and the mages and Templars are left to try and pick up the pieces. With some assistance now on our side though, it's time to head back to Redcliffe and save a child. There isn't much to talk about when it comes to actually saving Connor. It's a fairly straightforward sequence that ultimately ends with a meh boss fight, and the Desire Demon just casually squeezing her breast, I guess. Keep in mind I am talking about how my playthrough turned out. There are, of course, so many more choices within this. Connor stays mind-controlled, striking another deal with a demon, all that jazz. If I haven't made it clear already, Origins has the kind of narrative agency that RPGs can only dream of. The Wardens have saved Eamon, Isolde and her son Liv, but it's not enough to just restore him to health. Now we head for the Urn of Sacred Ashes. While we do that, if you think about it, it's a bit convenient that Andraste, the female Christ analogue to the matriarchal Chantry, was burned into Vinter, but just so happened to be carried to the other end of the continent and interred in the mountains, but that's mostly a nitpick. Dramatic license and all that, I guess. If the Mage Templar schism in the tower was more exploring freedom and repression, it is on the quest for the urn. The game explores faith in both its literal and figurative sense. The Chantry is not just an institution or army, it is the dominant religion, and the Warden needs to walk the same trial by fire. The writing in this section is, again, fantastic, and explores religious ideals and spirituality, while also expanding on the mythos of the game's universe, but we'll get to that in a bit. For a game called Dragon Age, each of these epochs or ages marked by signs, it's a good thing we actually get to see one such dragon. From the moment the player first visits Brother Genitivi's home in Denerim, it's clear something is off. We'll be here all day if I start commenting on lighting and whatnot, but the tonal shift from the warmth of Denerim to the cold unease of Haven hits home that something is very, very wrong here. Cults are something that games love to fall back on as fodder or for evil tropes. Look at the cannibals in Exodus, or every post-apocalyptic thing ever having to have some kind of religious leader shepherding the faithful in a now godless world. But the reason for Haven's existence is surprisingly nuanced. The community may very well have built up around the power of the ashes at first, but the idea that Andraste was reborn into a dragon is really not that much of a stretch to the common folk. Remember, this is a world where the old gods lie sleeping beneath the world, constantly sought out by the Darkspawn and the Taint, just as there is magic, spirits, and the believed seat of the Maker, the Golden City, lies at the heart of the Fade. The intangible becomes possible in Thedas, and there is every reason to believe that a goddess could be reborn in a different image. How could that not be possible when one's very own thoughts can form demons, and death and bloodshed risk tearing the veil between realities? Venturing through the ruined temples and passageways overrun by cultists is a nice visual change from the rest of the game. Snow is comparatively rare for the standard grasslands, forests, marshes that Origins usually has, and I also want to give credit to the music here too for the ominous humming of the choir. Something feeling not quite right is a colossal understatement by the time you've rescued Genitivi and fought your way through a small country's worth of cultists, but then she appears. Mechanically, the fight itself is a notable jump unless you've been using modded gear up until this point. Maybe this is a weird comparison, but the high dragon fight kinda reminds me of Manus from Dark Souls 1 in that it feels like a boss taken from a different game entirely. The dragon, Andraste if you want to believe it, will curb stomp you if you're not ready for it, and I had to change party composition a few times till I finally got through it. But eventually, it does, in fact, fall. It's been a hell of a fight pushing up the mountain. Remember though, we haven't even got to the ashes yet. If the cult was the big dungeon or mechanical challenge, it's in the temple where the struggle turns inwards, and Origins shows the kind of subtlety and introspection that would surprise most players, given this is the same game that EA's marketing team thought using Marilyn Manson in the trailers would fit. Who is, fundamentally, the Warden? Not only that, what baggage does the rest of the party carry with them? Like the dreams and the fade, this is another great moment where the Guardian will hold up a mirror and pose questions that some of your companions will find all too uncomfortable. As much hate as the fade gets though, it's funny that few people talk about the bridge puzzle in the temple. Interestingly, it was designed to not recognize more than 4 characters, such as Best Boy thanks to the dog slot mod. At last though, the player completes their trial by fire and finds the ashes of Andraste.
Congratulations, you found a waste bin.
If you needed proof of just how evil this game can let players be, I've taken the Often before and corrupted the urn for Colgrim. Defiling the remains of what is essentially the Chantry's goddess is just about the worst thing you could do in the eyes of Liliana and Wynne if they're present, and they will immediately turn hostile. This is the kind of choice and consequence that so many other RPGs would not have the guts to follow through on, but not Origins. Great stuff all round. The whole quest is, really. Genitivi and the Temple would play a role in future games, just look at the beginning of Inquisition, but for now, the Warden returns to cure Eamon, and this long push to secure one of our biggest allies is complete. From the highest peaks, it's only natural then that we now go into the bowels of the earth, and into the heart of the Blight itself. Here's where I typically go and play Soldier's Peak, and also visit Denerim for Alistair's personal quest, and drop off the scales at Wade's Emporium.
You're not welcome here anymore.
I need a sabbatical. Maybe someplace warm.
I hate my life.
But once that's done, it's time to settle in for the longest section of the game, Orzammar and the Deep Roads. For people more interested in the political side of things, the succession conflict in Orzammar is just about as good as it gets for portraying the noble houses. The few cities and taigs left to the dwarves that are not overrun by Darkspawn are slavishly fought over, bought and sold and then bought out again from one another, as those atop a culture mired in tradition and an age-old caste system cannot see beyond their own greed. Faded glory and the struggle between honouring tradition and the need for change are all central themes to the dwarves. A thing that's easy to forget, however, is that where other games would typically focus on the upper echelons of society, maybe throw a sub-story in there for good measure, Origins goes out of its way to show the underbelly too, the people at the very bottom who are walked on and exploited by a caste system that all of society adheres to without ever really knowing why. Reputation and one's bloodline is so important to the dwarves that a woman is immediately elevated to nobility with the records to prove it, just as a minor house will disown another, leaves her and her baby to the gutter because they didn't follow certain rules. For all its notions of honour, dwarven society exists on contradictions, and it's here we'll meet Olgrin too.
You've ever heard of me before, it's probably all been about how I piss ale and kill little boys who look at me wrong. And that's mostly true.
If you've played the Dwarf Commoner origin, or the Noble for that matter, a lot of this stuff will be seen in an entirely different light. Jarvia didn't come to power during the uncertainty of the king's death, after all. Both her and Barat were feeding off the nobles as much as the casteless, long before the Arducan crisis. Of course, the big question is who the player should support in the effort to get a king on the throne. Much like a certain other game about bulls and bears, the choice here is more about the lesser evil, or which one's flaws are acceptable enough to meet the Warden's needs. Balin is ruthless and will do whatever he can to achieve power, power and, in his words, bring about real change to Orzammar. The commoner Origin could just as easily hate his guts, but still support him so that his mistress, your sister Rika, is given a second chance at life that you know she would otherwise not have. The dwarf noble, however, knows that you're only in the Wardens in the first place because he murdered your brother and framed you for the deed. Haramont is the only one with enough sway to stand against him, but he's a traditionalist, and if you played Origins yourself, you know that maintaining the status quo is ultimately proven to be not the best thing for Orzammar in the long run. Any idiot can write a political story about a dastardly evil noble against a heartthrob farm boy with a head full of dreams. What separates Origins and games like it is that it is able to get into the nitty-gritty of what it takes to actually run a society, the banality of evil that bureaucracy and factional politics so often leads to, and whether or not the means justify the end. This is political writing at its best, and why Orzammar transcends the traditional dwarven archetypes of hoarding gold and crafting things into its own deeply rotten society. Is it better or worse than the surface world it so often shies away from? That's hard to say, but the Warden will make their choice for any number of reasons. Stability, their loved ones, or simply the best chance to get troops to the fight. For what it's worth, I went with Balin this playthrough because there is no one right answer. It's simply what you feel is best. In any case, it doesn't just stop there, because this far underground, there are far worse things than nobles to contend with, and it's time to witness the Archdemon for yourself. Maybe the feeling has shifted over time, but I remember there being a lot of talk about how exhausting the Deep Road section of Origins was back in the day. Personally, I love it. Yeah, it's going to kick the bejesus out of you if you're not ready for the kind of dungeon crawl longer than entire games, but it grounds, the conflict once again. Away from the nobles, the mages, ancient prophecies, treaties, the player is brought face to face with the blight and the true evils of the Darkspawn once again. This is what I was referring to earlier about the nightmarish, corrupting horror of the setting. Of course, modern day BioWare would think it's too triggering, and really the scariest thing is to be misgendered, but in another important step in revealing the depth of world building, Origins details how the Darkspawn are made, and it's not pretty. While we're on the way there though, now's probably a good time to talk about the core combat system, especially since I have free time with all these goddamn spiders using web. I'm not going to pretend that Origins is particularly deep in any part of this. It's serviceable, and the skill progression is inoffensive, perfectly fine for its time. Altheus was originally meant to spec into bows exclusively, but I ended up going dual weapons for melee because it feels much better since most encounters are basic ambushes, trash mobs that will swarm you and not much else. Similar to Fallout, because, I just have to mention it in every single video at this point, the animation work here adds a lot in making combat feel good. The finisher animations of leaping up to take down an ogre or cleaving someone's head from their shoulders is brutal and satisfying, which, one, plays into the bloody dark fantasy tone which BioWare was obviously going for, but also two, how lethal combat is. I won't get too off track, but one of the many reasons I loathe MMOs and flashy action games is the amount of shit covering the screen that makes it impossible to see anything. Origins was very deliberate in keeping the game simple in a sense, and rewarding fights with visual feedback that its otherwise basic combat systems can't do much with. Just take my advice though, don't use two-handed weapons. Anyway, since we're well and truly into the deep roads now, it's finally time to see what happened to Bronca's entire house, and the mystery surrounding this Anvil of the Void.
First day they come and catch everyone. Second day, they beat us and eat some for meat. Fifth day they return and it's another girl's turn.
I'm probably towing the line with YouTube at this point if I haven't already, but the body horror of how Darkspawn are made is the stuff of nightmares. As early as the Daily Shelf Origin, for example, Duncan hints that what happens to those who are carried off by the Darkspawn, living or dead, is something most people can't fathom. But Origins does well with handling this topic with tact, since there are no doubt the same kind of brain-dead, perpetually offended narcissists that are running BioWare today watching this video. It is not internalized misogyny or perpetuating violence against women or whatever other bullshit you can come up with to show something that is explicitly written as horrific and depraved and so obviously not condoned by any of the writers involved. The Darkspawn are archetypal evil in the same sense orcs from Lord of the Rings are. They exist to kill and inflict suffering because their very nature drives them to do so. I'm not saying that Tolkien would have ever approached something like the Broodmother, or even thought of it, but if nothing else, it impresses upon the player the importance of needing to deal with the Darkspawn threat as soon as possible, and the unspeakable evils that these creatures can inflict. Loghain may be a real bastard, blinded by his own hatred, but nothing you've been through thus far can compare to this. With the threat the Darkspawn poses, it's fascinating then that the writing shifts to ask what it might take to defeat it, and whether the Anvil of the Void is worth that cost. If it's not already obvious, you should take Shale with you for the confrontation between Caradin and Bronca, but the tragedy of the Golem having spent an eternity trapped by his own creation was a great touch to tie out the dramatic arc of Orzammar and the Deep Roads.
You have my eternal thanks, stranger. A trust and I'll turn sharp. May you always find your way in the dark.
With a king finally on the throne, and the dwarves marching to war on the surface for the first time in generations, it's time to head back to the surface and breathe fresh air for the first time in what feels like a lifetime. I've been putting it off long enough. Now that we have almost everyone on board, we should probably talk about the characters that form the heart and soul of this story. BioWare's magic was being able to tell these sprawling, epic stories while still giving a voice to the people at the heart of the conflict. Origins is no different, arguably their best cast, save for perhaps Mass Effect 2, so let's run through the list, starting in the order they're recruited. I've talked about this plenty of times before, but it's easy to look at the quirky, bumbling nice guy that a character like Alistair represents and feel like you've seen him 100 times before in every other bloody piece of media. However, this was over 15 years ago, and Alistair was something special. Written by David Gator, Alistair should, on paper, be everything that other stories would make the main character. The bastard, underdog son of the king, a plucky, quick-witted attitude with a heart of gold, and yes, he doesn't want power. In fact, he actively runs from it, so much so that he prefers the player to take the lead because he's happy to follow. Alistair is a kind and loving man in a cruel world that, frankly, he's not equipped for. Duncan's death has a profound effect on him for much of the game. He meant the world to him, and as a bastard son that was passed around from Eamon to the Chantry, it's not hard to see why he would have seen Duncan as a father figure. It's through him that we learn the most about the Grey Wardens too, as he relays stories of what could have been, just as much as everything the two of you lost at Ostagar. When it comes to his personal quest, Alistair is once again longing for that family connection, only to find that his half-sister hates his guts, that she has struggled more than he has, and that his dreams and ideals don't always work out the way he envisioned. You have the opportunity here to get him to toughen up and face the looming nightmare of him becoming king, but you can also tell him to not let this world get to him, that it needs people like him who wear their heart on their sleeve.
Once the Wardens flourished, their ranks full, their caliber certain. Now they even accept people like you, Alistair.
Hey.
I have almost always made him king, even at times where that comes at the cost of his romance path. Much like Orzammar, sometimes duty comes over feeling what is needed more than what we want, and he has every right to feel betrayed in this. He has spent his whole life up until this point shying away from power, running from whatever fate that the powers that be had in store for him, but that is partly why he will make such a wonderful king. Alistair is a good man, an earnest warden, and with time and the proper guidance, will prove to be a great king. Who his father or half-brother was doesn't matter, because throughout Origins, he shows that he's able to stand and fight by his own merit. Just, don't ask about sparing Loghain. Call me a simp, but I'm loud and proud, goddammit. If Alistair was the hero with the heart of gold, Morrigan is his polar opposite, the ruthless, cold-hearted witch that would do anything to get ahead. Knowledge, as she says, is its own reward. So is power. What is fascinating about Morrigan, however, is much like Viconia, once you get to know her and start pulling back her defenses, she's actually more of a naive young girl than her exterior lets on. Being raised by Flemeth would have made for some truly wild stories, no doubt.
Is my being upset so hard to understand? Have you never lost someone important to you? Just what would you do if your mother died?
before or after I stopped laughing.
But for as much as she sees the practicality that was ruthlessly drilled into her, she still never really got over the finer things in life. Small comforts and beauty, vanity if you want to ask the others at camp, are important to her, and why not? She is still much younger than she pretends to be, and the journey changes her as much as anyone else.
All I meant was...
Yes, I know. Do try to have fun, dear.
Sure, you could say her romance is really not that different from Baconia, allowing the Warden to bring out her softer side and let her guard down that life has taught her to value above all else. But I love Morrigan. A huge part of that is what a killer job Claudia Black did with the performance. So many of these characters are bursting with personality, more than the pre-canned animations can portray. Her personal quest is, naturally, about what it means for her to live in the shadow of Flemeth. This is the other big dragon fight in the game, and similarly brutal unless you save it till later on in the game. She's fully aware that Flemeth wouldn't be gone for good. The start of Dragon Age 2 would explain that later on, but perhaps for the first time in her life, she has a freedom with the Warden and the space to be herself that, quite possibly, she's not really sure what to do with. Much like Miranda in Mass Effect 2, it's too easy to dismiss this kind of character as an ice queen or bitch and not look any deeper, but Morrigan is my favourite companion in an already stellar cast. The reveal of the Dark Ritual towards the end of the game, and the opportunity to conceive a child with her is not only a great twist, another layer to the looming threat of the final battle ahead, but I'd also like to think that the Warden and her spent years enjoying a well-earned rest and raising Kieran in the Fade. Mother-in-laws, am I right? For years, I wasn't really sure of what to make of Liliana. On the one hand, I feel like she's a bit boring, that her story is fine enough, but nothing about her particularly stands out. That's not a bad thing per se. Not everyone needs a big tragic backstory or ties to some world-ending threat, but as time has gone by, I've learned to appreciate her more and more. If Alistair wears his heart on his sleeve, Liliana is more of the understated good, the desire to do things because that's part of her strong moral compass and social conscience. Part of this is through her faith in the Chantry and the Maker, but there's also a conscious drive to atone and redeem for what she feels was wrong in her past. The reveal that she was once a player in the great game of Orlesian politics is interesting, but I feel that doesn't really add much to a character that is already stronger for what she's done afterwards. Out of all the questions that the Guardian raises, it's the one for her that fascinates me the most. Again, more spectacular character writing here.
Why do you say the Maker speaks to you, when all know that the Maker has left? He spoke only to Andraste. Do you believe yourself her equal?
I never said that.
In Orle you were someone. In Lothering, you feared you would lose yourself, become a drab sister, and disappear. When your brothers and sisters of the cloister criticized you for what you professed, you were hurt, but you also reveled in it. It made you special. You enjoyed the attention, even if it was negative.
You're saying that I made it up for the attention? I did not. I know what I believe.
Love her or hate her, on some level the Guardian is right. Her vision, real or not, was out of her desire to feel special, not lose herself in the backwater muck of Ferelden for a woman that once enjoyed the finest of Orlais wealth. Playing an elf, she also has a moment where she comes to realize her own racism and ignorance around how what are essentially slaves back home were treated as property, and she goes through significant growth over the course of the game. Was her dream real? Did the Maker really speak to her? Ultimately, I don't really think it matters whether that's true or not, because she brought about her own change and overcame her past to become better. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to make her out as some self-flagellating martyr that constantly needs to repent. She is still secure and confident in herself, but it becomes more and more clear that leaving her own life behind was for the better. When Marjolaine appears and she has the opportunity to confront the person she once looked up to, even loved, that left her for dead, Liliana is presented with two paths. Either fall back into being the ruthless person that wants to use people for her own ends, or turn her back on it for good. I went with the latter, a shame given how this was retconned and she regressed into the spooky spy master in Inquisition, but Liliana is an earnest person that tries to do good, however small the act may be. I've said many times before that I'll die on the hill defending Sten, and you better believe I'm still there, goddammit. I genuinely don't get why people can't be bothered getting to know the big guy, because he always ends up as the second in command to my Warden, regardless of playthrough. What happened to the Qunari come Veilguard is a travesty we won't get into here, but BioWare rose to the challenge of trying to convey an entire, almost alien culture to Ferelden through a single person beautifully. I've seen people describe the Qun as an analogue of everything from Islam to fascism, but it's not really any of that. It's this fascinating mix of a caste system, meritocracy, theocracy, even elements of communism if you want to call it that, that's so utterly unique in fantasy, I can't think of any other society that compares. Even his very name, Sten, is a title. We don't know what the true name of what this character is, because Sten lives and dies by his honor, the embodiment of which he finds in his sword, Ursula. Bit of a side note, but I hate mods that change his appearance to be more like DA2, mostly because of the clashing art style. It doesn't bug me at all that he doesn't have horns, because he has the superpower that no other Qunari has, wearing shirts. For real though, Sten really is more of the big softy, as Liliana says, than he lets on, and his dedication to duty and upholding his ideals of the perfect warrior is admirable. Earning his trust and loyalty is genuinely beautiful, and I think of him as a true friend to the Warden and equal. It also helps he has some truly great lines, and that he kicks ass in combat. He is a character that's wise well beyond his years, and when he mentions the day the Qunari come to Ferelden, and he hopes he doesn't see the Warden on the battlefield, I'm right there with him. Of course, how could I forget the best character in any game ever, our faithful hound, the canonically named Barkspawn.
Just make him sleep over on the other side of the camp, with Alistair. With any luck, that will keep all the stench confined to one small area.
As yet another opportunity for me to bang on about how important and long-lasting the origins are throughout this game, it would have been just as easy to make recruiting him, as it were, the same way for every character, but if you play a human noble, you get your faithful hound right from the get-go. It's kind of bittersweet then that he's the last reminder of your old life, and everything you left behind during the fall of High Ever. I think I raised this at the time when I did that ranking RPG companions video ages ago, but as much as I love any fluffy friend, in games or real life, a lot of the appeal of dog is lost without the dog slot mod. No one is really going to pass up having a full party member over your dog, because beyond that one chance during the prison escape, he very rarely plays a role in cutscenes or banter or anything. He also gets injured very easily. The Dread Howl and Overwhelm abilities are very, very useful for controlling mages later on, but I feel bad just leaving the poor guy at camp most of the time.
You are a true warrior and worthy of respect.
Unfortunately, this was one of the first examples of EA getting its hooks into the studio. It's a shame that Shale was relegated to Day 1 or pre-order DLC, much like Javik was for Mass Effect 3, because Shale is so utterly unique, there's no reason not to have her. And I do mean her, because unless you haven't played far enough into her personal quest to find out, she's revealed to be one of the few who volunteered for the Anvil of the Void, and a stalwart friend to Caridin long ago. In terms of utility, Shale unfortunately isn't that great either. I recommend most players only add her to the party just outside the area before Caridin. All that being said though, I love Shale for the similar reasons I love Sten. You can imagine the BioWare of today having a meltdown at the whole it thing that's part of her shtick, but Shale is dry, sardonic, and subversive in the same way HK-47 was in KOTOR. Like Sten, she requires effort to get to know. She has very little love for mortals, or those dreaded pigeons, and it's understandable why she'd feel that way. The thematic question for her is whether an object can become a person, just as much as whether this world is worth saving in her eyes. Treat her well, and she will come to see you, as a friend, something that a centuries-old golem, even as cranky as she is, may never have thought could happen. On the surface, it's easy to find Wynne grating. She's the wizened mentor, the sage, the elder that shepherds the true heroes and keeps them on the path of the right and just. For all the advice she can offer, however, she's defined just as much by her failings as her successes. With time comes perspective, and having lived almost her entire life in the Circle, it's interesting that she's mostly at peace with it. When her personal quest comes with the opportunity to meet with Aneurin and remedy her arrogance of the past, it means a lot to her because she is already living on borrowed time. If we were to judge companions purely by utility alone, Wynne is easily the best companion in the entire game. The Spirit Healer specialization will help you through the tougher parts of the game, and Cleansing Aura alone is huge for getting rid of injuries. Quick aside, but Origin's punishment for falling in combat is something I've always liked far more than Death's Door in Pathfinder's lower difficulties, the laziness of Essential Status in Bethesda games, or Resurrection in Baldur's Gate and Divinity. Anyway, Wynne may come across as a bit naggy at times, but she does genuinely want the best for you. It's the reason why she left the Circle in the first place. She realizes the importance of the quest you're on, and much like Gandalf, Yoda, and other great mentors of storytelling, that it is a path that will not be easy, nor should it be walked alone. The reveal that she's essentially being kept alive by a Fade Spirit is an interesting twist on the formula, deepening her specialization as a healer once again, but also the idea that she's willing to give everything, even life itself, to help see this mission through.
I'm not the sort of person that leaves things unfinished. I'll see this through, I promise.
Crucially, despite her age, she is never portrayed as weak or feeble-minded either. In fact, Wynne can be quite sharp when she needs to, meaning she is no more a witch cackling in a bog somewhere than she is a dementia patient looking for her glasses. She understands the necessity of the Circle, and, above all, champions life, for mages and Templars both. At the game's ending, with the last goodbyes to all your companions, and she mentions she'll be heading with Shell to Tevinter for one last adventure, it is a bittersweet moment, and a heartfelt goodbye to a sincere and enduring character. If you ask Oghren about literally everything, this is usually his reaction.
What's she got that I don't? Just the thought of the two of them together, kissing and licking and intertwined on the floor of the deep roads. I'm just gonna go back to the tent for a moment.
He is truly subversive in the sense that he's the polar opposite to everything you've just seen in Dwarven society. He couldn't care less about his caste or house. He couldn't care less about the rules or traditions or the proper way of things. He's a drunk, offensive brute. Frankly, he's kind of pathetic, pitiful, but it's still good writing nonetheless, and Steve Blum naturally kills it in bringing him to life. I do think it was a disservice for the writers to relegate most of his backstory to a codex entry no one would probably read, so that's partly why so many people bounce off him at first. While I don't think he can compare to some of the other cast, I've warmed up to Oghren over the years, and also appreciate the fact that most RPG developers today wouldn't touch someone so politically incorrect with a 10-foot pole. His personal quest is the weakest of the game. You literally just talk to someone and that's it. It feels like he wouldn't have even had one, save for the writers needing to set up what would happen in Awakening, but at the end of the day, Oghren is still a decent character. It just takes time to get used to his particular brand of charm. Last, and unfortunately least, we come to Zevran. This is not a problem with John Curry's performance. The guy is obviously very talented and must have a portfolio a mile long at this stage, but whereas a character like Isabella, for example in Dragon Age 2, can exude sex appeal and there's more than what she seems, there really isn't much else to Zevran. He has a paper-thin personality, and only once did I ever try his romance. Sure, I can understand this kind of character isn't for me. Like Cullen, he's very popular with women apparently, but I just don't really care. Usually I'll finish him off as soon as defeating his little ambush early on, and only really took him along this playthrough for the sake of getting footage. The crows are such a far-off threat that they're essentially dropped and forgotten about until the moment this guy who's suddenly introduced appears, and there's this turning point about whether Zevran is still loyal to you. I'd done enough by this point to get him to stick around, but Zevran leaves about as much impact as he inspires. Very little. If it's not his personality, it's certainly not his utility either. Don't be like me, just use the Lockbash mod instead. You might be wondering about the big mystery companion, but I'll save talking about him until much later. It's really not the secret that it seems. Anyway, where were we? Oh, right, the Dalish. See? Even I forget they exist sometimes. It's not that there's some kind of mechanical incentive or whatever, but I like to save the Brazilian forest till last because it's a nice change from the long, arduous trek through the deep roads, and to get some fresh air. It's worth noting this is the only area that doesn't result in a potential companion either, so it's a good opportunity to pace things out and catch up with characters. Before we head into the forest, let's talk a bit about the main camp. With the amount of time I've spent in this little map over the years, it's practically a second home at this point, listening to that beautiful theme and talking with Bodan and Sandal. Around this point, BioWare also throws a curveball your way with the camp being attacked by Darkspawn, and it's a cool moment to see everyone fighting on screen together. Fittingly, for Dalish characters, you will also find out what happened to Tamlin, but let's leave that for now. The forest awaits. Before Inquisition, and worse, Veilguard came along and decided that the entire universe never mattered, it was elves, and only elves, responsible for everything, there was a time where the Dalish were just outsiders to the setting. I've said before that my canon Warden is a male Dalish who went through the Dark Ritual with Morrigan, because although I don't typically care enough about lore like so many people often get into RPGs, the Alluvions, old gods, all that stuff, it just fit my guy best. The Mage-Templar conflict is ultimately a human concern. Sure, there are certainly elves involved, and at least tangentially related to the conflict, but Origins caps off its wonderful ride through the universe by exploring the push and pull between the modern world, the human world, and the elves that cling to the remnants of the past. In many ways, the ones who play pretend and still dream of Arlathan that fell long, long ago. It's fitting then that this area's story revolves around the cycle of violence and revenge. Before you get your golf club out though, Origins once again proves how easily it wipes the floor with the kind of stuff being released today by going beyond childish conclusions of violence bad or let's all be friends, but we'll get to that in a bit. If the Circle of Magi felt like being trapped, the deep roads exploring the true horrors of the Darkspawn, it's in the Brazilian forest that the game takes a step back and looks at the mysticism, the weird and the wonderful of its setting. Moments like talking with the great oak.
It rhymes? 'Tis a rhyming tree. One can only imagine what manner of spirit is involved here.
Or the crazy hermit that stole the acorn show, much like Wind Spirit, that there is so much more to the magic and world than just being dark and depressing all the time. This is why it's so important to have contrast, which, speaking of, nature can be just as wild as it is beautiful. As a certain harper once said, it can take the life she gave. And so we come to the werewolves. I'll be honest, my Dalish warden would have put them all to the sword without a second thought, because nothing makes him see red more than humans committing violence against his people, however long in the past. For this playthrough though, as much as memories of the wedding still linger in his mind, I went with the good guy path for Altheus and convinced Zathrian to finally let go.
You are my maker, Zathrian. You gave me form and consciousness where none existed. I have known pain and love, hope and fear, all the joy that is life. Yet of all things I desire nothing more than an end.
I imagine YouTube censors are having a field day with the Lady of the Forest's design, but screw it, I've come this far. Ultimately, the Brazilian forest is a neat little side story with Origin's trademark depth of choices, siding with the werewolves, the Dalish, brokering peace, but it's one of the weaker parts of the game, and has little relevance to play Origins themselves. Now, it's time to head back to the city. Loghain, Howe, and the underbelly of Denerim await. Entering the final act of the game, it's easy to forget just how far you've come in a comparatively short amount of time. With all your allies secure and entire nation's worth of armies at your back, you must first face Loghain and finish what began all the way back at Ostagar. This moment is a big deal if you play the human noble Origin, finally getting a chance to take out Arl Howe, but there's more important things for my city elf warden at the moment. Denerim, in many ways, represents a different kind of challenge, not monsters or demons, but a pit of vipers and a web of intrigue that you've already spent most of the game only just getting a glimpse of the overall design. First of all, the player needs to, unfortunately, get a Nora on their side. Breaking into the Jarl's estate is a hell of a throwback given what happened with Aryan at the beginning of the game, a complete completely despicable scumbag who's voiced by the same guy who did Male Hawk, funnily enough. And for seemingly the last of the Curzon line, you finally get your revenge. Imagine my surprise though that Logain's daughter, who, you know, we're sent to conveniently retrieve, somehow betrays us. Who would have thought?
Sir Catherine! Praise the Maker you're here. This brigand tried to kidnap me.
Barely met, and already she betrays us. She and my mother would get along famously.
It was so obviously a setup from the beginning. That's not a criticism, by the way. Honora is obviously the kind of self-interested, power-hungry noble that this whole section is spent struggling against. My interpretation of what happened here is that she was testing the waters. Hal did imprison her. It's clear that Logain is well and truly gone at this point, but tipping off Catherine meant Honora would still emerge victorious, regardless of the situation. Still, it is easy to see why a lot of players hate her guts. Don't worry though, because agreeing to show her support later on will give the player an opportunity to pay her back in kind. On the upside though, at least the scenery is nice. This whole section results in the funniest moments of the game, should you choose to wait for companions to break you out. What's more incredible is that it's entirely optional. You can potentially beat Catherine and leave the estate, but it's very difficult. I didn't get footage of it, but I'll put a link in the description so you can see just how much this changes based on who you pick to come help you. From Morrigan trying her best to act as a priest, to Zevran and Ogren pretending they're circus performers, the writing team had so much fun with this sequence, and I appreciate it. Anyway, a slow, painful death wasn't on the to-do list, so after standing round with Alistair in your underwear for a bit, it's time to get out of Fort Dracon. Another example of how much choice is in this game, you can try dressing up as a guard and pretending you're recruits, but I usually just take the direct approach. Once back at Eamon's estate, it's then off to the alienage and looking at the handiwork that Al-Hal left behind. I do think it's a bit of a cop-out that Duncan invoked the right of conscription to stop the pogrom in the first place, only to have it happen anyway, but that's not really a criticism of the writing, because Hal and Logain are obviously evil bastards that would do anything to come out ahead. Teventa has, for most of the game, been left mostly in the background, spoken of as this far-off threat that doesn't really affect Ferelden. Not only to reinforce the poverty and suffering of day-to-day life in the alienage, it is here the game pulls back the curtain and shows what slavery really involves. How, Logain, even Teventa, we could put all that aside, because it is the elves standing guard by the door, the captain in the warehouse, the elves that all blindly follow the healers and this plague, the million unseen faces where coin exchanges hands that really enables this stuff to happen. This is a big character moment for Altheus, of course, and other city elf players, to see Shiani again and rescue your father before it's too late, but a lesson the game so often reinforces is you can't save everyone. It kinda sucks knowing that Valandrian would be there in any other origin path, but it's a difficult choice for a difficult situation. For the record, I've never taken Caladrius's offer because it's the kind of cartoonishly evil act that doesn't even really mean anything, considering how powerful you are at this point in the game anyway. Core stats will be pushing high 30s, even into the 40s, so the buff is unnecessary. In any case, proof of just how far Logain has fallen? Don't worry, we're about to talk about him properly very soon. From the hero of Riverdane and Marek's brother-in-arms is found, and that seals the deal for the final confrontation ahead. You have your army, you have the Banon, the Arls. It's time to end this and confront the real threat. In the space of what's maybe 20 or 30 minutes at most, BioWare pulls off the kind of intricate branching choice of backroom politics that no other game has ever done. The Landsmeet is a momentous achievement in RPG writing and design. Choices you've made, even right back to the beginning of the game, come back to help or hinder you here, and the sheer amount of outcomes in this one section is just, it's hard to convey through this video alone. First of all though, let's finally talk about Logain. Logain is a great character, tragic in some ways, but he is also stupid and short-sighted. Again, that's not really a slight against his writing, but as a person in the world, he was so blinded by his hatred of the Orlesians and his paranoia around Kaelin, he apparently thought he was honouring Marek by leaving his son to die on the battlefield.
The Emperor of Orlais also thought I could not bring him down. Expect no more mercy than I showed him. There is nothing I would not do for my homeland.
For a long time, I was in two minds about Loghain. On the one hand, I understand why he does what he does, that he is not acting rational, and he's essentially committed to the whole ends justify the means. On the other, he's so unhinged. He's actively destroying the country he once gave everything to defend. He has betrayed everything he and Marek once stood for, let Howe imprison his daughter, and, as a general, use the Grey Wardens as a scapegoat for his problems, that it's beyond incompetence, and his shadow lingers over the whole game. Simon Templeman does a fantastic job. I really need to stress that, but over many playthroughs, I've only ever kept him alive once, and it was pretty disappointing. I don't blame BioWare for not putting much effort into him at the 11th hour, but he's little more than an extra sword at this point. Riordan's argument that the Wardens need everyone they can get to face the Archdemon has merit, and don't get me wrong, I have no problem with players who can roleplay that. What is best for the country and the soon-to-be king, though, is for this once great hero to meet his end. I want to play some of his final lines here. This is great character writing, and the resolution of a fantastic chain of quests.
When we first met at Ostagar, I would never have thought so, but Ostagar seems like it happened in another lifetime to someone else. A man is made by the quality of his enemies. Marek told me that once. I wonder if it's more a compliment to you or me. Daughters never grow up, Honora. They remain 6 years old with pigtails and skinned knees forever.
Father!
Just make it quick, Warden. I can face the Maker knowing that Ferelden is in your hands.
It's worth noting that if you don't amass enough support, the Landsmeet will turn into a free-for-all. If you know what you're doing though, it's pretty easy to build up enough points behind the scenes to turn the tide in your favour, and finally, you're now able to focus on the Archdemon. Of course, there's one final decision, and that is who will be Ferelden's next king or queen. Origins once again shows its breadth and depth of choice by the range of outcomes here too. Alistair can rule alone, or with a romanced human noble, or be tossed out in disgrace and become a wandering drunk. Honora can rule alone, or marry Alistair, and best of all, I forgot to mention you can even get your dog to duel Loghain too. Damn you, Eamon. As mentioned earlier, I've almost always ended up with Alistair as king alone, maybe a human noble if it works out, because sometimes that's what's best for the country. Remember that Honora was there just as Howe and Loghain was. She turned a blind eye to the alienage, the kidnapping and torture of the nobles, the civil war with the Banorn. Even if you ignore everything that has come before, the betrayal at the estate, she is a snake that has done nothing to change the country's prospects. So why let that continue? Whatever happens, in a twist not too dissimilar from the people who discovered what happens to Necropolis in Fallout 1 if they took the water chip, many fans over the years have found out the hard way what it means to appoint romanced Alistair as king with any other female origin than a human noble. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made, and as this game so often returns to, what is best for the Wardens, best for Ferelden, may not always be the best for you. But now, come hither. Ferelden marches to war. So begins the final section of the game. Loghain is defeated, the Darkspawn horde marches on Denerim, and all of Ferelden has come together in a way not seen for centuries to face their common enemy. By this point in the playthrough, approval is very high or maxed out for every companion, gear is upgraded for the endgame, but there's one last thing to do: return to Ostagar and lay the ghosts of the past to rest. Despite what I mentioned earlier, it's here where Loghain gets the most development, and players can get some insight into why he did what he did. Unfortunately, this was post-launch DLC bundled in with the Ultimate Edition, but I always save it just before the end of the game because things have come full circle in a sense. In any case, Alistair takes up his father's blade and his rightful place as king, and the face of countless lives hangs in the balance. The Archdemon is here, and the final days of the Fifth Flight with it. It's here where Origins shows it has one last trick up its sleeve. Despite Loghain's protests, how you, Alistair, and Riordan were hounded relentlessly, so much of what Duncan and the rest of the Wardens never got to tell you is revealed. To slay an archdemon is to take the corruption into yourself. You and Alistair have given everything, sacrificed so much, but you may very well have to make a final one that is the hardest. Why Flemeth would ever have let a potential vessel in Morrigan loose is then simultaneously revealed, as it turns out this was their plan all along. Morrigan knew from the very beginning that the Wardens would have to die, that she was ultimately after the soul of the old god, but falling in love was, well, that was never really part of the plan. Having done it a bunch of times over the years, the character writing around getting Alistair and Morrigan to sleep together to save your lives is certainly one hell of a conversation to have if you've romanced him, but thankfully that wasn't needed here. God damn it, David Gator knows I have a type, because just like Viconia, there was no way Altheus was turning away from Morrigan. The fact it may save both their lives is ultimately secondary. Whether the magic works or not, it is one last night as the end approaches. And perhaps, one day, he could see the child for himself. The final piece for this brilliant, heartfelt game falls into place. Arise, arise. Spears shall be shaken, shields shall be splintered. A sword day, a red day, ere the sun rises. Ride now, ride now, ride. Ride for ruin and the world's ending. The reason why I love these games so much, why I return to the golden age of BioWare time and time again, is because of these characters, the soul, the care that every part of these games was just bursting with. At the emotional climax, fighting alongside all your friends, your companions, the countless allies that you fought and bled for, it all comes together in a way that no other game can replicate. Just like the ending of Mass Effect 2, it is once more into the breach, and really, the Warden couldn't have asked for a better group of people to die alongside. The stage is set, and the objective is clear. Reach Fort Draken, and take out the generals along the way. As you say your goodbyes, for what may be the final time, it rounds out these characters' stories that have endured more than any other RPG has. I'll let the rest play out from here.
Kill those godless bastards! We're counting on you, Warden! Make her watch over you!
The actual push through Denerim up to the fort is pretty straightforward. By now, there are no more games, no more treaties, no alliances to broker. There's only a sea of darkspawn in your way. It's incredible that the Summoning Horn is able to accomplish something that Baldur's Gate 3 couldn't, making your alliances actually mean something, as armies and various named characters will appear alongside you. Getting to the alienage, it's a nice touch to round things out with Shiani, and fighting alongside people who would have once walked past the city else without so much as a glance. Sten is in command back at the gates, and again, this battle is pretty straightforward like the rest. It's worth noting though that the amount of ogres the game throws at you at this stage is insane, so be careful not to get overwhelmed by being rammed from every direction. If there's one criticism I can levy towards this end stretch of the game, it's that Riordan never really meant much to the overall story. He's there more as a plot device, one, to show that the Grey Wardens have noticed what's happening in Ferelden, but also for context to reveal the final twist. I don't feel anything at his death, but I don't think the team were expecting people to either. He was more like Jory and Davith and all the faceless Grey Wardens that died at Ostagar. Another life taken, but you're close now, and it's time to stop it. Not one more. The final push through Fort Draken up to the top of the tower is where the weaknesses of Origins encounter design really shows itself. Let's be honest, Dragon Age combat is almost always trash mobs that swarm the player, and that's basically it. If there are bosses, they are typically just stronger default enemies with a bigger health bar. Thankfully, it seems Sandal is on our side, and there's one last opportunity to stack up on items before the Archdemon. BioWare did their best to make this encounter feel big and special, but again, it's just a dragon. Not even really as difficult as Flemeth or the Urn of Sacred Ashes, but it's still fitting to see all these allies you rallied together fight alongside you against the embodiment embodiment of evil. Origins rounds out its story with yet another plethora of outcomes. If the Dark Ritual was performed with but Morrigan isn't in the party, Alistair, the Warden, or Loghain potentially, will decide who shall take the final blow. Romanced Alistair can potentially sacrifice himself to save the Warden, even if he was made king, or the Warden can make the sacrifice themselves. Whether it leads to a solemn funeral or a coronation, the story ends on a high note, even if the greatest of sacrifices must be made. At the very top of Fort Draken, after seemingly a lifetime of suffering and hardship, the fifth light is finally ended, and Althæus sinks the blade into the Archdemon's head, for life. For all his companions, for Shiani and the Alienage, for Duncan and the Grey Wardens, it is finally over. Dragon Age Origins means a lot to me. Even after all this, there are huge swaths of the game, so many little details that I've skipped over. When I first played it as a teenager, I no-lifed this game, day after day, week after week. 12, 14 hours, even longer, where I would be glued to the screen and finish one playthrough only to immediately start another. When I moved house back in 2014, I lost my disc copy of Origins that I had sank an ungodly amount of time into by that point, but since then, I put another 500 hours into Ultimate Edition on Steam. I say all this not because I'm trying to make myself out to be some kind of expert or authority, but because if this video hadn't already made it hit home, I adore this game, and it has helped me through tough times over the years. BioWare had a run of games that no other developer before or since has matched, and although we all know how things turned out today, it still can't take away what a masterpiece, a true, genuine masterpiece, Dragon Age Origins was. Despite its rushed development, I did grow to admire Dragon Age 2 over the years, and Inquisition, despite all its open world MMO-style bloat, has some great moments too. The difference, however, is that Origins could stand on its own, and like many of the great stories we love, it was written with a definitive ending. There were no sequels planned, no concerns for retcons or the direction things would head next. Origins is a remarkable achievement in RPG writing and design, and it is one of the best games I've ever played. These characters are more real to me than all the fancy mocap, peach fuzz, or shader magic in the world. It's a game made by people who cared, who delivered a universe that was familiar and yet unique, and crafted a story full of world building and choice that is yet to be rivaled by any game, full stop. It is not such a terrible thing to get attached to stories, especially when those stories are so damn good. If you're wondering about the DLC, I won't be talking about it. Awakening is very overrated. A lot of that love seems to come from the fact it was one of the last true expansions, but it was the beginning of the end for BioWare, and where I really started to feel how rushed and uncanny the writing was compared to what had come before. There's a bunch of other garbage that EA was experimenting with before DLC and live service crap had got its hook into the industry we know today, but Witch Hunt and finally passing through the Alluvion with Morrigan is where Althæus' story ends. When I look at Dragon Age as a series now, I don't mourn what it became. I don't feel angry or disappointed. I never have and never will play Veilguard, because even with all that came later on, the need for tie-in novels and franchising still doesn't detract from what a brilliant, heartfelt game Dragon Age Origins really is. The choice, the narrative agency, the characters that continue to reveal unparalleled depth. This game is truly special, and if you want to see the very best of RPGs, you owe it to yourself to play it. Thanks for watching.